Well, ladies and gentlemen, in this video, I'm going to be going through a final realistic best case scenario for Donald Trump. We've got some recent polls, and they can tell us a pretty good indication of the states that Donald Trump might have an outside shot at winning if everything goes perfect on election night. This is a hypothetical. There's obviously going to be a lot of states where Trump's just got no shot based on how partisan our politics are here in this country. But still, you can see Trump upwards of 340, 350, 360. I mean, I haven't filled one of these out, so I don't know the exact total number I can potentially give Trump if he wins every single state that's within shouting distance. Maybe it's only a 20% chance, but if there is a chance, this is a best case scenario, so I'm going to give it to Trump. I do have my personal prediction with Trump at 312, so obviously it's going to be more than 312, and the 312 is the standard swing states, all seven going to Donald Trump. But when it comes to, I'm going to go through every single state and say, is there a chance that Trump could win or no? So obviously, when you look at a Washington, there's no chance Trump can win. It's just not going to happen, even a best case scenario. I think best case, maybe he loses it by 11 or 12, which would be less than 2020 and 2016, his losses there, but it's not going to happen. Oregon, I think best case is maybe a 5 or a 6 point loss. I know people will argue, well, there were some polls that were close. There's been some people that have told me maybe Oregon flips. It's just not going to happen. I understand there's limited polling. I get there was a poll that was kind of close from a Democratic pollster, but I also think there was a recent poll in Oregon. I don't know. Let me see if they actually have it on here. That was like an 11-point lead. Oh, no, they don't even have it on here. That was a Republican pollster, by the way, back in July that had Oregon +5, but it's just not going to happen. I mean, best case scenario, I can lighten it up a little bit. Maybe it's a closer loss, but I just can't give Trump Oregon. It's not realistic, even in a best case. California, it'll never happen. Best case, I think, is Trump getting it under 20. He lost it by around 27 or 29 back in 2020. So if he gets it under 20, that's going to help significantly in terms of the popular vote. Best case, Hawaii, it's just not going to happen. If Trump would have picked Tulsi Gabbard to be the VP, maybe you could have an argument. I know that's something people have been saying, and I still don't think it would happen. I mean, he's going to lose it by like 30 points, but that's just not going to happen. Obviously, Alaska, Trump's going to win very easily no matter what. There has been some liberal talk about, well, it was only a 10-point win back in 2020. Maybe it gets closer. I think Trump expands it to around a 12 or 13 win. Best case, obviously, would be like a 15 or a 16-point win. Montana, Idaho, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, obviously all going to Trump. There's no doubt about it. The state at large. And then the really, I mean, in the best case, Trump would also take the second district in Nebraska. It's unlikely he's going to win that. And pretty much everyone, Republicans, Democrats, there's a pretty high consensus that Harris is going to get that second district. Now, that's a district that Trump lost in 2020. He won it in 2016. So you would think possibly he could flip it in 2024. But you're talking about a very small area. The population has shifted more left. That's just the reality. But in a best case scenario, you're only talking about, realistically, he's probably going to lose the district by 5 or 6 points. So a best case scenario, you could see him winning that district for sure. I was more bullish on that district back in the summer until we got some polls that had Harris up by like 10 or 11, and it's hard to really swing that for Trump. Kansas, obviously, Oklahoma, Texas. Texas best case scenario would be, I think, like an 8 or a 9-point win. Some people will say it'll be a double-digit win in Texas. It's just hard to see based off of the population shift in that state. I think we're very happy with a 7 or an 8-point win. If you guys don't know what's been happening to Texas, I'm sure many of you do. You look at 2012 to 2016 to 2020, it's shifted about 3.5 points to the left every single cycle. Trump won it by 9 points in 2016. It was down to 5.8 in 2020. Liberals are trying to get that dialogue going in Texas as it's gotten more electoral votes. More liberals have piled into that state. It's become very important. And obviously, they want to get down to 3 or 2 points, make it a swing state. If Trump can win the state by 7 or 8 points, that's going to stop the narrative of Texas being purple. And it's going to be seen heading into the 2028 election as a more Republican state, even though it's gotten closer over time with the population shifts. So best case, I think would be 9 or 10. But realistically, I think it's going to be a 7 or an 8-point win right now. It's looking like for Donald Trump in Texas. Best case would include a win in New Mexico. It would be a very close win. Donald Trump did visit New Mexico on Halloween for a rally in Albuquerque, so his internal numbers suggest that he must have at least some chance. You're not going to go out of your way and go to New Mexico, 4 or 5 days before the election for no reason. So right now, the polls that I've seen is about a 5 or a 6-point loss in New Mexico. That's the margin that I would project. But a best case scenario, you visit New Mexico, it's right along the border. There's some narrative there that Trump could potentially flip it. I'd say it's only about a 10 or 15% chance, but The idea is there in a best case scenario. When it comes to Colorado, it's just not going to happen. Colorado has gotten too liberal with Boulder, with Denver, the influx of liberals from California. They're not just going to Texas, they're also going to California. And we're also seeing liberals migrate from New York to North Carolina. But when it comes to Colorado, it's going to be a loss. I mean, 2016, you could argue Hillary only won it by 4.5, but it swung 9 points in 2020. And I think it's going to be like, people are going to be like, well, maybe it'll be close again. I mean, it'll probably be closer, although I don't know. It might even be a more exaggerated loss than 2020 just because of the shifts in Colorado. I would imagine it'd be a double-digit loss at least. There's just not a lot of polling out of Colorado. I would actually like to see if there was another poll that got released. See, I mean, these are, a Democratic pollster, plus 11, plus 12. Biden won it by 13.5. Hillary only won it by 5. Maybe Trump can get it within 10. I mean, that would be good if Trump got it within 10 just because of how liberal the state has become. Obviously, Utah is a win when it comes to these two swing states, the Sun Belt. You've got Nevada and Arizona. Best case scenario, I think Trump would be a win in Nevada of like 3.5 to 4 points. Arizona, you'd love to win it by around 5 or 6. So those would both obviously be wins. I think Trump's going to win those either way. This is the best case, but I also think in general he's going to win those. Look at this. I have like almost exactly half of the United States filled out. Actually kind of I'm not used to seeing that. I don't know. It's kind of warping, but you do have Minnesota. Best case scenario, Donald Trump nudges a very small victory in Minnesota. It is possible. He's only down by, depending on the polls, 4 or 5, you could argue 2.5. There was a poll where he was down by 3, which is within the margin. Personally, I do think Virginia and New Hampshire have a better chance of flipping than Minnesota, but I think Minnesota is probably a better chance than New Mexico. So that's kind of how it would go in terms of the next states for Trump. This is best case scenario. It would be a very small win in Minnesota. It would be a very small win in New Mexico under a best case scenario. When it comes to Iowa, obviously we saw the polls yesterday. Even in a best case, the polls that I saw in Iowa yesterday, even with a best case scenario, I think Trump loses it by a point. I'm kidding. Obviously, Trump, best case scenario would be like a 13 or 14 point win in Iowa. There was the crazy poll that had Harris up by 3, but there was also an Emerson poll that got released yesterday that had Trump up by 10. Very confident Donald Trump will win Iowa very easily. Missouri's going to be an easy win. Arkansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee, Kentucky, Indiana. Best case scenario in Illinois, it would be maybe about a 7 or an 8 point loss, so you could lighten it up a little bit, but I just can't see... Illinois is just not going to flip. It's just, it's too big of a population too quickly. And there's very limited polling out of Illinois. I was kind of expecting maybe a big poll to be released from Illinois just to see. Now there actually is polling. They don't have it in Real Clear Politics because I guess they don't trust the pollster. They don't have the pollster in here. But you can see 16-point win, 17-point win. I would imagine it'd be about a 11 or a 12-point win. Best case scenario, Trump would somehow get it under 10. But it's still going to be a Harris victory. That's just the reality when it comes to that state. When you look at Florida, best case scenario, I think, is around a 13-point win for Trump in Florida. That's absolute best. It's more likely going to be around 8 to 10 if I had to guess right now. But Trump's going to win Florida no matter what. Florida and Ohio. Ohio, best case, would be over 10. You'd get a double-digit point victory in Ohio. It is possible. I would imagine to be around a 9.5 to a 10-point win. I think Florida could be more conservative than Ohio based off of what we saw in the 2022 midterms. It's just Florida swung crazy with those state races compared to Ohio. J.D. Vance only won by 6. It was kind of a little bit of a letdown. But still, I think Ohio is definitely going to be conservative. There's no doubt about it. It's just a matter of what is the margin. And in a best case scenario, it would probably be around a 10 or an 11-point victory. Maybe I'm underselling Ohio, but I don't think it's shifted crazy right like Florida has to where it would be like a 15 or a 16-point win, considering Trump only won it by, I say only, but won it by 8 points in both 2016 and 2020. We're not going to see a 7 or an 8-point shift further to make it a 15 or a 16-point win. It's just not going to happen in Ohio. And you're also, you can also see the Senate race. It's reflective. I think Moreno's going to win the Senate race, but it's not like Moreno is up by 4 or 5. It's very close in terms of the polling with Brown against Moreno. Now, Brown is the incumbent, but you would think if Ohio was really going to swing for Trump by 14 or 15, Moreno would be up by at least 4 or 5, and he's really only up by like 1 or 2 right now. I do think Moreno will end up winning. When it comes to Georgia, best case scenario, Trump probably wins by about 4 or 5 points. South Carolina is going to be a Trump state no matter what. North Carolina, best case would be around, I think, 4 or 5 points. Georgia and North Carolina are similar in my opinion. I do like Georgia and Arizona slightly more than North Carolina in terms of definitely going for Trump. I think all of these states will go for Trump. I'm guessing it's going to turn into this Sun Belt versus Rust Belt, We're seeing Kamala Harris go to Pennsylvania 3 times. They're really going for broke in the Rust Belt, and then maybe they think they can also pick off Nevada, but the Nevada polling looks relatively good right now for Trump. But obviously, best case, these would be margins that would be higher. It would be like a 4 or 5 point win in a Georgia, in a North Carolina. I think he can win Georgia by around 4 points, honestly. Best case scenario would be a very slight victory for Donald Trump in Virginia. You'd be looking at, 2 point win, 3 point win. There's been relatively close polling in Virginia I've seen recently. Me personally, I couldn't move Virginia. Some of these polls are not inputted. There was a poll that had it tied, Virginia tied, and then there was another poll that was a Harris +1 that's not in here. But you do have the Rasmussen Harris +2. You've got the Mary Washington Harris +2. The Christopher Newport is really swinging this average to being +5.8. Outside of that poll, it'd be around +2 or 3, or around 3.5 in terms of the aggregate. So that's really swinging it. It is what it is. I think Virginia is an interesting state to watch, but I could not, on my main map, I could not predict it to flip. But in this scenario, Trump would be able to flip it because it is best case. Obviously, West Virginia would be going to Trump. When you talk about the Rust Belt, all of these states would be going to Trump. I do think, best case, Trump would be able to win these by around 2 or 3 points. They're all going to be very close. Pennsylvania, best case, would probably be slightly more than a Wisconsin, which would be slightly more than a Michigan. I don't know. We're sitting here wondering which one's the most conservative. There's different polls that say different things. The relative opinion is that Pennsylvania is the most conservative out of the Rust Belt based on previous history and also this election cycle, the polling that we've seen, but it's very, very close. I just saw a poll that had Trump winning, a poll of all the swing states. It had Trump winning Michigan, but losing Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. When we routinely think Michigan is the most liberal, but it just shows you how close these Rust Belt states are. But in a best case scenario, Trump would be winning all of those. Best case scenario, Trump would also take New Hampshire, and I do think there is a chance Trump can win New Hampshire. You look at the polls in New Hampshire right now; it is very, very close. Real Clear Politics did switch New Hampshire from a lean Dem to a pure toss-up. You've got a Rasmussen Harris +1. There was another poll that's not in here that was Trump +0.5. Maybe not the best pollster, but even an Emerson Harris +3, that's within the margin. So New Hampshire is a state with a bunch of independents. It is possible. Now, me personally, I don't have it flipped on my official map, but it is potentially possible depending on what happens. It would not totally shock me. Another thing that I could see Donald Trump very narrowly winning Maine at large. Now, Trump's obviously are very likely going to win that second district. I guess the best case scenario, we'll put it in bold. The first district, there's zero chance Trump has of winning it. But when it comes to that, the two electoral votes, the Maine at large, there was a student poll that was released that was very accurate in 2020 that does have Donald Trump up by 8 points. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I would say right now Harris is the favorite for the two electoral votes in the Maine at large. Trump's going to win the second district. Harris is definitely going to win the first district, but in a best case scenario, Trump would win that state as well. You look how blue this map is. It is very, very, look how red this map is. It's very, very red. When it comes to New York, I just can't see it. I can't even lighten it just because a best case scenario for me is 13 or 14 point loss. There was some sad polls in New York, because originally we were seeing Biden Trump polls and it was legitimately Trump was losing 7 points in New York back in the summer, which is crazy. And you would think the trajectory with Trump going to Madison Square Garden, doing another rally in New York, the energy's amazing, but we just have not seen that. Now, there's not a lot of polling, and I think the polls are overestimating Harris. They've got her up by an average of 17.5. I don't think it's going to be that margin. The thing for New York that we're going to be watching is how much is Trump actually able to make up from the loss in 2020 of around 23.5 points. Can he cut that in half and only lose by 12? Because I've been thinking about 12.5 point loss. We'll see. But it would have to be Trump outperforming the polls in New York, which he's done routinely. But I'm just interested to see the margin. Even in a best case scenario, New York's not going to happen. Vermont's not going to happen. Connecticut's not going to happen. Best case scenario, we can lighten New Jersey a little, but it's not going to happen. Even in a best case scenario, at this late in the cycle, he's not going to win New Jersey. I know there's some good in-person early voting numbers. That's nice. And Trump actually talked about it, but it's just not going to happen. New Jersey, I think best case is about a 7.5 point loss. The GOP party in New Jersey apparently is terrible, I've been told, and they just don't do a good job. But either way, it's just a liberal state right now. It is what it is. We are seeing the shifts in a New York and in a New Jersey, but it's not going to be far enough, in my opinion, to really swing it. Delaware is going to be a liberal state no matter what. Maryland, D.C., Rhode Island, and then Massachusetts. So, it would be around 347 for Trump. I do think that very likely is his absolute high water mark. That's very narrowly winning of Virginia, New Hampshire, Minnesota, and a New Mexico. The only argument you might be able to make would be an Oregon, and that's it. I can't see a New Jersey argument for Trump right now. Illinois is not going to happen. I think Illinois really is just it's a liberal state. I mean, Oregon, you could argue maybe it's within 5 or 6 on a perfect night for Trump. But this is a very, very red map. And yeah, I would say 347 right now would be the absolute high water mark. That's with Maine at large as well, and that's winning the 2nd district in Nebraska. And this would be kind of the official landslide type victory for Trump. Now, I classify a landslide as like around 370, 380 electoral votes. That to me, that's a total blowout landslide. But this is crazy, 347 to 191. And this would be a popular vote win of probably undoubtedly of like 3.5 points for Donald Trump, or maybe around 3. But either way, this would be Trump's best case scenario at this point. That's going to do it for this video, guys. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.